Welcome to Legends from the Shadows, Tales of the Unexplained. I'm your host, Eric Dion, and I'll be your guide through the mysteries that lurk beyond the ordinary. Join me as we peel back the veil on legends, myths, and enigmas that have nestled themselves in the shadowy corners of history. From cryptic creatures to eerie occurrences, we'll embark on a journey to uncover the truth, mysteries, and whispers that have captivated curious minds for centuries. Get ready to venture into the unknown, where the line between fact and folklore blur, and the stories that dwell in the shadows come to light. Greetings, dear listeners. Today we embark on a mystical journey into the realm of the hidden folk, creatures of folklore and myth that have enchanted cultures worldwide for centuries. So join me as we uncover their history, sightings, and enduring presence in the modern world that we know it. So, the hidden folk are also known as elves, fairies, or other ethereal beings. They've inhabited the collective imaginations of humankind for ages now. These elusive creatures, often residing in hidden realms or within nature itself, are said to possess extraordinary powers and live parallel to our own world. But what lies behind these tales? That's one of the biggest questions right now, and that's what I want to delve deeper into, their history and their lore. The origins of the hidden folk are also known in Icelandic folklore, the Huldufólk, are deeply intertwined with the rich tapestry of Norse mythology and the cultural beliefs that the Nordic people had. Now, these mythical beings are believed to have traced their lineage to ancient pagan beliefs that predate the Christianization of the region. In Norse mythology, there's a rich tradition of supernatural beings, including elves, dwarves, and other mythical entities, which likely influenced the conceptualization of what we know or refer to as the hidden folk. The roots of the Huldufólk might also be connected to the ideal of land spirits or nature spirits that were revered by Nordic societies. These beings were believed to inhabit specific natural locations such as rocks, forests, caves, and they are also seen, though, as guardians or protectors of these places. Now, over time, and culture, these nature spirits became intertwined with folklore surrounding the hidden folk. How? I don't really know, but a lot of the contributing factors to it and contributing to their association with certain landscapes and their roles as custodians, basically, of the environment. Now, legends passed down through generations have further, embellished the origins of the hidden folk. They weave tales of their creations and existence into parallel with humans. There's some stories out there that suggest they are descendants of the Norse gods themselves, while others actually depict them as being born from the earth itself, tied to the natural elements that were imbued with magical abilities. Now, both these narratives can vary across regions, reflecting the diverse cultural beliefs and oral tradition of what we would know and consider it as Nordic people. The origins of the hidden folk are persistent as a blend, of ancient mythologies. You have your folk beliefs and your cultural heritage that have evolved through the centuries of storytelling and shaping the collective imagination of the Nordic communities. Now, their specifics of their origins might differ from one tale to the other, but the enduring fascination with these mythical beings continues to enrich the fabric of the Nordic region. So, in the end, when we're touching base on history and lore, the folklore surrounding the hidden folk has just transcended cultures and civilizations from way, way back. From the Scandinavian tales that said that the Huldufólk or the hidden folk dwelling in places to Celtic belief in the slide or residing mounds. They've woven themselves into the tapestry of other numerous mythology. Like legends describe the hidden folk as guardians of nature, possessing both a mischief and benevolence, which, that's kind of go. Like if you can't see something, you're going to be afraid. We're all usually afraid of the unknown. That's what causes fear, and that's what can cause so many misconceptions. You have stories of encounters with these beings ranging from helpful interactions with humans to like cautionary tales of those who dare to disturb the domains of the hidden folk. And throughout history, their sightings and interactions with the hidden folk have been reported, and each account keeps adding more and more layers to their mystique. Okay, so let's explore some notable, I guess, sightings and encounters that have contributed to the lore of the hidden folk. I want to start off by touching base over in Iceland, specifically near Reykjavik. Back in, I want to say it's 2014, they were supposed to be building a highway that would link the Alpens Peninsula to the Reykjavik suburb near Gardabar. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, I do apologize. I'm awful at pronunciations and stuff. But this road was actually halted from being done for a bit because they had campaigners, protesters out there warning that if they disturbed the elf habitat and the protected area around it, that there would be nothing but trouble. There was two particular spots that were in question at that time. One they actually had labeled as Elf Church, and the other one was labeled as Elf Chapel. Now, let me be very, very clear and distinct here. When saying elf and fairies and stuff like that, I'm not talking like what most people would say, Santa's elves, these little guys that pointy ears, green, purple, pink, whatever color out there. No, actually, when we're talking about hidden folks and the fae and elves and stuff, they're actually the same size as us. Some can be tall, some short, some fat, some thin. It's not what we perceive. It never has been. It just, they are hidden to us. So that being done and said, they had these two spots that the locals and everybody did not want messed with because they were said to be fairy locations or elf locations. In the end, the matter ended up being resolved in part. There was a local lady there. She claimed to talk to the fae, and she was given a chance, and she went and did her thing. She said she spoke with them, and they ended up mediating, and they came to an agreement that the road could be done as long as the Elf's Chapel was carefully moved and placed elsewhere. And that's what they did. Now, we're talking about a 70-ton rock, and I don't know the cost of moving stuff like that very carefully. All I know is I'm trying to look up into information that the Highway Authority still to this day will not reveal the cost that it cost them to move that rock. And they had to hire a bunch of cranes and stuff in the end. So that's one of the ones that I've followed for a while. Just trying to get more and more information on it here and there. It's Iceland. It's such a beautiful country, from like the hot springs to just the countryside. But their deep, enriched folklore surrounding the elves is just something amazing. They even have a fairy school there that you can enroll in. And that to me is just one of those things that I'm just like, this is great stuff. Let's move on now and let's talk about Fairy Ring. Now there's a lot that goes on with the Fairy Ring. So if you break it down on a science level, it says, basically science says that fairy rings are patterns of certain types of mushrooms that grow in a circular formation or naturally occurring phenomena.
and they usually appear year after year on lawns or in fields or in the forest. But fairy rings, they occur when mushroom spores fall in a favorable spot, and then they spread out, and basically there's an underground network of fine tubular threads called hyphae. Now, the mushroom caps then appear at the edge of these networks that are formed underground, and the formation continues to expand upward. And they use all this nutrients within them as they grow larger and larger. There's a ring in Belfort, France that was considered and still is considered the largest ever seen. I think it measures approximately a little over 2,000 feet in diameter, and it's over 700 years old. Like, it's been coming back and back and back and back, which is crazy. Now, the lore behind a lot of this is people regard fairy rings with a strong sense of curiosity and fear, because they believe them to have be mystical and be places of like supernatural powers. Within folklore, we can tell that cultures across Europe have traditionally believed that fairy rings were the dwelling places and portals into the fairy worlds, elves, witches, and all types of other magical creatures. And some of them, there's some lore out there that states that it can be very dangerous to enter into these things. But there's just so much. And then you start getting to the thing where people are like, well, what could be so dangerous about a circle of mushrooms? Well, to the English and Celtic tales, any human that would enter into a fairy ring would end up being forced to dance with the creatures. And they were unable to stop until they either went mad or they just basically died from exhaustion. You're thinking, I can dance, Look, if you're having to dance for an eternity or until you pass out and die, that was the thing. You have Dutch traditions out there that tell you that the rings were created by the devil himself. And what he would do is he would have, that's where he basically would churn milk. And that any livestock that entered into that circle, they would basically suffer by having their own milk sour, I guess you say. And then you have Austrians legends that said the dragons burned the ground around there, and that's where that's how you get fairy rings and stuff like that. There's so many different concepts behind these fairy rings. You even have there's a old Welsh tradition, and it varies a little bit about the consequences of a human's arrival into the fairy ring, and that the rings aren't actually brought about by fairies themselves, but by the nature of their world. And according to the legend, the pace of the fairy world differs from that than our pace. So you're taking two different planes of existence, and they're moving at different speeds. And that, with that being the case, a person could dance for a minute in a fairy ring only to discover that it had been days or weeks in our human realm. So you could sit there, and I guess you could say that if you entered into a fairy ring and danced for 10 minutes, you might come back into the human world, and it could have been 100 years, and that's why you're dead. So there's a lot of interesting stuff when you're going into that darker side about fairy rings. But then again, not all myths and legends and folklore surrounding fairy rings are quite so dark. You have some legends out there that say that fairy rings are actually really good luck. That most your legends and folklore tales don't suggest entering into them, but some of them do say that it's a good omen, and you should grow your stocks and keep your livestock and stuff and feeds around fairy rings, because it'll help improve fertility, and it will help with your good fortune. Over in Germany, the fairy rings down there, they were called witches' rings or hexen rings, and they were believed to be places where witches would come and dance and celebrate the Walpurgis Night, which was a festival that enters into or brings in the coming of spring. Now your fae and your fairy folk and hidden folk, they're all, they're usually typically, I guess you could say, associated with otherworldly phenomenon, and magic and, mysteries. But, even Shakespeare, he alludes to a fairy ring with appreciation. Let me double check here. It was, Act 2, Scene 1 of A Midsummer's Night's Dream, in which the fairies say, "And I serve the fairy queen to dew her orbs upon the green." So, there's so much history around these, and we still don't know, science, if we take the science stance or you take the skeptical stance, okay, it's just the occurrence of the way the mushrooms grow and the underground sprouting up and stuff. But then you have all the unknowns and, other history behind it as well. You figure as the weathers start to cool and stuff, rings start popping up all over the world. And then, of course, here we go. Our imaginations are let loose once again. And it's been going on for thousands upon thousands of years now. So when it comes to that aspect, I guess you could say it's going to be up to you to decide with like fairy rings and how much you really, really want to go into it. So moving forward a little bit, I want to talk about Ireland's Glens. Over there, you have witnesses and all types of people that have recounts about meetings with fairies in Ireland's lush greenery out there. And this still ties in some with the fairy rings that we were just talking about, or the Ring of Wrath. There's good parts to it, like we've said. They say if a couple can't conceive, they can go visit the Wrath at certain times of the year and ask the fairies for help. It's also the case like somebody who's seeking to get married. They can make requests to the fairies and their ancestral spirits at the Wrath. And it says their wish is granted, they will be married within a year, providing the ritual has done correctly. So there's a lot of customs and rituals that go back and on. There's also, I guess you could say, a fairy gift associated with the Ring of Wrath. And that is that musicians can go there and sleep overnight during one of the ancient festivals and certain dates. And that when they awake, they will receive the gift of otherworldly musicianship. Now, of course, my theory, and this follows along with folklore and other legends of it, is when you're going and doing something, there is going to be a price. Now, what that price is, I don't know. There's always a price. It's the whole deal with the devil. You get this great gift given to you, but there is a cost. And there's not, I just didn't find enough information just yet on this first episode to say what those costs were. But, it's crazy. And, that's just how it goes. And people believe it. There's a lot of belief in this. Like if a person or even a child goes missing in a lot of these places and countries, there's the locals jump right on it, and their attitudes actually change towards the fairies. An example, there's a case in Wicklow. A young girl vanished for 3 days, and that whole community out there, they went out there searching for her all over the place. They were looking in ditches, they were looking in the forest, the woods, looking in fields, and they just couldn't find her. The girl finally reappeared. I think it was like 3 or 4 days later. And when she told her parents that she had been taken, this was what she said, I'd been taken away by tiny men, little red men. And nothing was questioned of her about that. The girl said she managed to overcome her ordeal, and she even took them to the site and location where she was abducted. And the town, nobody chastised her or anything. What they ended up doing was preserve that location and marked it off, because they didn't want any other kids or any other person to go and experience the same ordeal or suffer that, I guess, same fate in the end. And, that's how strongly they believe in that culture. I can only imagine the distress of having to look for my child when they were little. But, it also ties back to, you have your whole communities, they come together. And it's one of those things. I wish society nowadays, more of us would all just come together naturally. I wish it wasn't going to take things to cause despair to get everybody to do something. But, that's how it is. And then, doing some more reading out there, the biggest thing I've noticed is that when people claim to have returned from a fairy realm, and there seems to be different realms out there, their lives are often changed forever just by recounting what has happened to them. There's another example out there. It was an Irish example about a woman being abducted by a fairy. She went missing overnight, and when she returned, she told everybody that had been searching for her that she was in a lovely city and saw lovely women, and they all bowed to her. And it's almost like a contemporary, I guess you could say, parallel to UFO abductions, but where this lady was describing more advanced technology and fairies rather than, aliens and, probes. So there's just a lot going on within this. There's so much. This could be a whole series just devoted on fairies if I really wanted to break it down. And, I'll probably touch back on that more as well down the road. But, going from the early Middle Ages up into like the 20th century, many people living in rural countrysides of Europe have the wild aspect of nature was, I guess back in those days, nature was still untamed. You had dangers that lurked in the woods and the water, and it was believed that the spirits around there, or the fae and fairy folk, they jealously would guard their territories, and if you happened to trespass upon it or cross their paths, that they were going to punish you. Now, on the other hand, you had many aspects where people believed that the spirits could be very helpful. When treated respect, a human might be blessed or rewarded by befriending certain spirits, and fae and folk and fairy folk were the hidden. But because spirits, just like us, we're capable of good and bad tempers. Your fairy folk, they're just as bad. They can have good days, they can have bad days. So throughout the course of all these different cultures, it comes down that the biggest words of caution were to use caution when approaching these or when interacting with them. And this is really just an extension, I think, in general, of the dangers back then of the unknown that were posed and put out there about entering the forest just in general. Like, we don't have all the technology that we do now. And, woodlands and forests provided substance, building materials, medicinal plants and herbs, but they were also, to us humans, they were home to fierce predators that would stalk throughout the woods of Europe. And among, I guess, all those creatures, back in the day, and this first one is one of those that we'll cover down the road, but they were thought to be like werewolves. And, there are bears and wild boars and all types of other animals out there. So you had to basically keep your head about you when you're walking through the woods, and people would just become paranoid because the fear of the unknown will influence you. And it also, I strongly believe, the fear of the unknown has always influenced our beliefs, and these beliefs can sometimes lead to spiritual answers, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of occurrences. So, like getting lost, for example, on a path or a road that you've always traversed many times over and over, and like the back of your hand, but let's say you got lost. Well, back then when people would get lost for the same situation of knowing they took the correct path, they did all this, their first thing was, oh, it's the work of a mischievous fairy. So in the end, they're traveling and they get lost because they followed an unnoticed trail that they, I guess, just didn't notice. Now all of a sudden it's basically the work of that fairy trying to lead them off into another realm. So yeah, there's all types of stuff. And then there's other aspects and influences and stuff, because you could consider like the foods and the berries and stuff that they might have ingested, because we don't have that knowledge like we did back then. Could it be a psychoactive plant? There are lots of plants out there that can alter our perception and even cause hallucinations. So that could allow us access, I guess, to otherworldly realms and to see things or entities that would seem to exist all of a sudden, depending on what we ingested. Now this kind of brings me around to a discussion of like DMT. You have many people out there who will question what causes clairvoyance and like what causes second sight or things like that. And that's a whole nother show's topic to begin with. But don't ask me to say the scientific name, because that would just be butchered. But I'm going to say with DMT, the molecule is one of the main active ingredients used by Amazonian shamans. It always has been. They're used with some vines to produce a brew, and that brew was called ayahuasca, which invokes, I guess, radically states of consciousness and lots and lots of encounters, visuals. But DMT was also produced, it is also produced, I guess you could say, in our brains naturally, even in the lungs and the pineal gland. Under certain circumstances, it can be released in a higher quantity that would cause a very altered state of consciousness. And that being said, in 1990 and 95, there was a General Clinical Research Center at the University of New Mexico Hospital, and it was a Dr. Rick Strassman, and he got volunteers and he injected them with varying amounts of DMT, and they underwent profound alterations of consciousness. I mean, this involved intermediate stations of normal consciousness to transportation to different realms of reality with like divergent metaphysical properties and inhabited with a plethora of different creatures. And a lot of these people describe it as, encountering creatures such as elves, fairies, lizards, reptiles, insects, aliens, clowns, various entities. One woman even described a pulsating entity that she called Tinkerbell-like. And the experience, especially at higher doses, represented to the participants a complete parallel reality that was super like real. Like, they did not believe they were hallucinating. It was not a dream. It was substantially a built reality with full sensory interactions and telepathy within the residential entities within. And when I say a lot of people, we're talking like 2,561 testimonies were assessed, and that was also assessed by Johns Hopkins School of Medicine there in Baltimore. So there was a lot of stuff. The experiences they reported came from irrational, absurd, frightening, illogical, all the way down to surreal. And there was no questions of like the volunteers, like, of them ever actually leaving the hospital bed during the experience. But all of them, and I say all of them, without any exceptions, the world that they went to was completely as real as the one that they had left behind. Like, in their minds, it was true to form. So that research kind of demonstrates that under the right conditions, the human consciousness can operate within distinct and a separate universe inhabited by a range of different entities. Now, how does this come in to everything else? It's just saying that I guess you could say, there's so many factors of like, we want to say, oh, we can't just say, oh no, fairies are real, but we can't say they're not real. It's just like somebody eats something and take a certain drug or do anything, or are some of us just more in tune to things when it comes down to it? There's a lot of, I guess you could just say, questionings. And that kind of brings us back to more fairy experiences of what are these fairies that have been a part of humanity for thousands of years? Like, where do they come from? Are they adapting to cultural codes or evolving into new forms? And what level of reality do they actually exist? Now, there's a gentleman who's out there, David Lukes. He did a 3-part interpretation for non-physical entity contact, is what he called it. And he used it to access, I guess you could say, study into otherworldly beings. Many of which these beings were mainly, like, I guess, fairies or had fairy-like attributes that were encountered by people who had altered states of consciousness with DMT. And this is where I'm tying this back into the DMT thing. But it was also a valid tool to evaluate what may be happening to anybody who reports an experience that includes interaction with non-human intelligent entities such as fairies. So his 3 parts to it: first, they are hallucinations, I guess you could say. The entities are subjective hallucinations, such as a position favored by those taking a purely neuropsychological approach to the phenomenon. So a materialistic reductionist. 2 would be they are psychological / transpersonal manifestations, which is, the communicating entities appear alien, but they're actually unfamiliar aspects of ourselves. Be they our reptilian brain or our cells, molecules, or subatomic particles going into it. And then thirdly, the entities exist in other worlds and can interact with our physical reality. Numerous experiences provide access to true altered dimensions, inhabited basically by independently existing intelligent entities in a standalone reality. Now that exists collaterally with ours, and we may interact with our world when certain conditions are met, but then the identity of entities remain speculative to us. But then when the conditions are met, we can coexist and, I guess you could say, bleed off into another realm or reality. Now, of course, all 3 of these interpretations could be true at different times and under various circumstances within one individual's life to the next. From a materialistic reduction standpoint, all fairy experiences could be reduced straight down to hallucinatory events, meaning that, nope, you saw this, and not even just fairies, you can say these alien abductions, Bigfoot, whatever. From that materialist reduction standpoint, it's all because we're hallucinating for whatever reason, whether it's our own body chemistry or something external. It's just that's that standpoint, and there is no physical residue as an after effect to the interactions, and the reports are all going to be limited to just visual and audio experiences. But you have the specific injunctions allowing for the hallucinations to take place cannot be properly analyzed, so there's no way to do that. So seeing them all as arbitrations of visual and audio fields remains one, I guess you could say, legit interpretation or conclusion of that. That model is still reliant on the theory that consciousness is, I guess, a byproduct of the brain. The implication is that the brain, for whatever reason, is simply misconstruing our sensory inputs from the physical world, where things like fairies simply don't exist. This is the hard, I guess, and fast standpoint of it all, which is, I hate saying it, but it's super embedded in Western culture. And it's one of those standpoints that now I think should be challenged at not only a fundamental level, but by religious and mystical traditions. There's too much, and there's a lot just going on. It's despite the advances of modern technology, the allure of hidden folk still persist. Fairies still persist. People believe, pop culture, movies, it's there. Their presence is still felt in literature, art, popular culture. It influences stories, movies, podcasts. It's even inspiring modern spiritual practices focused on nature and spirits. Druidism is still coming back. In today's world, the belief of hidden folk varies greatly, but it's more collective still. And while some dismiss these as being mere superstition or folklore, other people cherish this tradition, and the stories are still being passed down through generations, keeping their essence alive in our collective consciousness. So whatever their nature is, it seems for fairy folk or the hidden folk or the hoodoo folk to make contact with humanity, it requires our consciousness to become loosened from the usual restraints and enter almost into an altered state. And when I say that, I'm not saying, okay, go do drugs. I'm saying, think about it. And I can attest to this firsthand. Today's stresses in the world have us so tightly wound and our brains so just that it's ridiculous. Whereas if rewind 400 or 500 years, we were more open, we were more accepted, we were in a loosened state from the restraints out there. We weren't necessarily in an altered state, but we were chill. So if the model of reality is affirmed by those statements out there, then I guess if we're allowing access to a greater overall mind, where the existence of entities and fairy folk can be represented either as a standalone class of their own, or maybe perhaps it's just an aspect of the human collective unconsciousness out there. But either way, it just appears, fairies are here to stay. They're functioning on some nebulous plane where any interpretation of them is reliant on us finding a way to incorporate consciousness into a physical reality. This is something that still to this day, it's eluded both philosophers, it eludes the scientists, even just general people who like looking into this stuff. It's been going on for millennia. And so perhaps it's no surprise that fairy entities, whether they're nature spirits or aliens or interdimensional beings or products of our collective imagination, no matter what they are, for the moment, and I think for quite some time, they're going to remain an intangible but enduring part of our culture that we have out there. So, this is gonna kind of wrap it up right now. God, there's so much I wanted to tie in and go down, and call me rusty because I haven't done a radio podcast or anything in, God, it's been 10 years when I stepped out of the field. But it'll get better, I promise, and we will come back and touch deeper into a lot of this stuff. But just want to say, as we conclude our journey into the mystical world of the hidden folk, the presence remains a testament to humanity's fascination with the unknown. Whether embodiments of nature's guardians, figments of our imagination, or just something beyond our understanding, the legacy of the hidden folk endures, nestled within the heart of folklore and legend. So thank you for joining me on this enchanting exploration into the hidden folk, and I encourage you all
to embrace the wonders of the unknown and continue to seek the magic that resides in our world. As our journey through the mysterious concludes, we step back from the shadows, but their secrets linger. Remember, in the quiet corners of the world, mysteries still whisper their tales. Until we meet again, stay curious, embrace the darkness, and never forget that truth often thrives in the most unexpected places. As we part ways, may you always find fascination in the unknown and the courage to explore the depths of the unexplained.